Hello and welcome to Zoo Radio. I'm Colin Daly and each week I'll be taking you on a guided tour of the zoo. We have been granted exclusive behind-the-scenes access to all the major exhibits, as well as a unique insight into the residents from the people that know them best. This series has been recorded using the very latest in three-dimensional binaural recording techniques and is best listened to through a set of stereo headphones.
My name's TREVOR. I'm Deputy Section Head of the birds, where I look after the penguins.
Which member of the animal kingdom do they belong to?
Birds. Basically. A lot of people do think they aren't, because they think they've got fur rather than feathers, because they're so tightly packed. It's for insulation, obviously, because they live in cold climates and they swim in cold waters. They need to keep themselves warm, so they have very small feathers, and a lot of people think it's fur. But they are birds, flightless birds, obviously.
We've got two types of penguins with us here. From which countries have these originated from? I can't speak. Brain's frozen.
Where are they from? The black and white ones you can see in front of us, they're Humboldt penguins, or Peruvian penguins. So they come from the coast of South America, Peru down to Chile. There's a water there called the Humboldt Strait, and that's the area they come from. The other ones with the yellow feathering on the head, they're macaroni penguins. They're found in the sub-Antarctic regions, or on small ice islands. I can't speak myself now. On small islands around the Antarctic.
So that's quite a difference in the climate between the two.
Yeah, although the Humboldts come from South America, it's not as hot as you think. It is quite cold. There's a cold water that runs around the coast, but obviously they don't see ice and snow like the macaronis do, obviously.
That's an unusual name there, macaroni. Where does that come from?
Apparently it's from some poem in America, Yankee Doodle Dandy. There's something about feathers in their hair, yeah. So.
And how did they come to be at the zoo? Were they endangered or rescued or?
The Humboldts have been here for probably the last 40 years. Not these ones in particular, but these are offspring that we've bred from previous birds. They are endangered. There's probably only about 10,000 pairs of those in the world. But the funny thing is, all the zoos have specialised in them, and now the zoos are actually more or less overrun with them. So, although they're endangered in the wild, they're not in captivity. Whereas with the macaroni, this lot we've got here actually came from Edinburgh Zoo, where they have got masses of them basically, and they give us some of their surplus birds. But apart from us and them, we're the only ones that get to keep Humboldts in Britain. And not Humboldts, sorry, macaronis in Britain.
Is there any plans to release them into the wild then, if there's so many?
It's not feasible, really. I mean, if you want to look after the ones in the wild, it's better to look after them on situ rather than trying to introduce it, because obviously most of these were hand-reared, they're fed dead fish, they've got no real instinct for hunting their own fish, if you know what I mean. So it would be a major programme to try and reintroduce them.
How would you describe the personalities? Is there different personalities between the two species?
Yeah, to be quite honest, the Humboldts are a much more aggressive bird than the macaroni. Saying that, the pair of macaroni we've got when they're on the nest site can be aggressive, but in general, especially when you're feeding them, the Humboldts don't hesitate to take your finger with the fish, whereas the macaronis are much more gentle and take the fish much gentler. We feed them Baltic herring and sprats, but in the wild they'll eat things like squid and things like that.
And do you add additional supplements to the diet?
We do. We add fish eater and salt tablets each day to compensate for the freezing of the fish.
So this isn't a saltwater pool then?
It's not, it's fresh water. It's filtered with a sand filter which runs 24 hours a day. It's chlorinated to keep the algae down so we don't have to empty it and clean it, so it's constantly working. To have a salt pool, it's a lot more involved, because with evaporation you have to keep the salt levels at certain things, whereas with the chloride it's worked on a time clock and you can adjust that quite simply, because with chloride it will evaporate in sunlight. With the salt it will stay in the pool and get concentrated, so you have to keep changing the levels.
On an average day, how much would they eat then?
Each penguin averages probably about half to 1 kilogram of fish each.
That's brilliant. Okay, thanks. That's about it for them.
Okay.
Thank you.
animal is different to that of a gazelle. The gazelle is cloven-hoofed, whereas a camel's foot is webbed and can displace weight. Although numerous in several areas around the Falklands, the striated caracara has quite a small breeding population of approximately 2,000. Since their arrival in December 1991, our wall-drop ibis have hatched 30 chicks. Most of these birds have now been moved to other zoos. The African spoonbill's beak acts as a scythe or hooked tool to catch its food. Their diet consists mostly of fish and aquatic invertebrates.
My name is Nick Masters, and I'm a vet, and I work for a private practice which specialises exclusively in zoo and wild animal medicine. And this practice subcontract me to Twycross Zoo for at least 2 days a week, so essentially I'm the resident vet at Twycross, which is a fantastic opportunity for me.
Okay, so you cover all the animals then?
Yeah, I do, yeah. It's actually, things here are quite busy, and it's quite difficult for me to get around and see everything all the time. So what tends to happen is I get to know the animals as they're poorly or require some kind of treatment.
Okay.
But yes, I do.
Can you talk me through a typical day's work, if there is such a thing?
I'm not sure I can, because I don't think there is really. My days always vary, and they might be quite quiet and involve some routine health screening. We might take some samples from an animal to check that they're healthy before we move them to another collection, for example, or they might be more urgent requirements. Some examples of extremes would be, we have some Amur leopard here, and we anaesthetised our male because there were concerns that he had a heart murmur, and hopefully he's going to be part of a captive breeding program that will allow his young to be returned to the wild, to the Russian Far East. So we needed to be absolutely sure that they were going to be healthy young from a genetic point of view, and that none of them would have any heart problems. So we anaesthetised him and had some specialists come in to listen to his heart with ultrasound equipment. And then at the other end of the scale, I might end up looking at a spider in the tropical house.
Okay, how long did it take you to train to become just a standard vet and then to specialise afterwards?
So standard veterinary training in this country is either 5 or 6 years, depending on where you go. Where I went, it took 6 years. And then at the end of that, I subsequently did an extra degree, a master's in wild animal health, which is run by the Zoological Society of London, the charity that runs London Zoo and Whipsnade Wild Animal Park, and that just allowed me to specialise really in zoo and wild animals as opposed to cats and dogs and sheep and cattle.
And what's the most unusual case you've had?
Goodness me. I think possibly we have some Asiatic lion here. We have 3, a breeding pair and one of their youngsters, a young male called Moamba. And Moamba is due to move to another collection where he'll become a breeding male himself very shortly. But before we went, because the European population of these animals in zoos came from a very small founding population originally, there are some health concerns about them, and so we wanted to be absolutely sure that he was 100% healthy, and to do that we needed to give him his brain an MRI scan. So we anaesthetised him, and we had a company come here who specialise in MRI scanning animals with a great big articulated lorry with a scanner in the back of it, and we put him in the back and put him into the scanner, and everything was 100%, so that's great. And pretty shortly, I think within the next few months, he'll be moving to another collection in the UK, which is great news.
That's quite impressive, really. Have you got what would you say would be the best and the possibly the worst part of your job?
I suppose that the best part is just overall it's such a privilege to be able to work with such an incredible diversity of species. It really is. Very few vets get to do that, so I count myself very, very lucky, and I find pretty much every day I get confronted with something, a species or a subspecies that I've never done any work with before, so it can be slightly daunting but very exciting, and as I say, a great privilege. I think the worst side of it is when things die, and that's inevitable, I suppose. In the wild and in any zoo, things will die of old age, but inevitably things die of disease sometimes as well, and despite our best efforts to try and prevent it, and someone always has to pick up the pieces and establish what went wrong. So I do post-mortems as well, which is not my favourite thing, but a crucial part of trying to work out how we can improve the welfare and health of animals in our care.
So all the information that you get, is that all collated then and spread through different zoos?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an enormous network of information, something called the Animal Record Keeping System, or ARCS for short, and all European zoos use this same record keeping system. So every animal that we have in the zoo is individually identified, has its own record of health, kept both as hard copy and also on computer systems, and all of this information is interchangeable with other zoos, and if we were to move an animal to another zoo or receive one, their health records would go with them. And that whole system actually is going through a big process of change at the moment to make it even more efficient.
Do you have a favourite animal or section?
I think probably my favourite animal here has just gone recently. I think opinions divided whether people they sort of loved him or hated him. He was a variegated, well still is a variegated spider monkey called Zach. Is a young male who was an absolute character, and from the moment that I got here, had very strong interaction with him, just with him in his enclosure and me outside, and unless I was actually doing something where I'd sedated him and sort of had hands on. But he was an absolute character and a bit of a lunatic, and he's gone to Frankfurt where he appears to have settled in quite well with some of his own female brood now. So yeah.
Okay. Can you recall any amusing stories that have happened recently?
Yeah, there are always amusing things going on. Yesterday I don't know whether you think this is amusing or not, but it's interesting nonetheless. We have 4 two-toed sloth here from South America. 2 of them are in our tropical house, and 2 have been in rabies quarantine for the last 6 months. And now that the 2 have finished rabies quarantine, we needed to definitively sex them to make sure that they were both female. So yesterday we sedated both of them and had a good look, and whilst they're awake it's very difficult to tell the difference, but once they're asleep and you have a closer look, we worked out actually one of them's male. So that changes our plan slightly with putting them all in the tropical house, because we already have a male in the tropical house and they'll fight if we put them together. So
perhaps you need another tropical house.
maybe we do, yeah. I think what will happen is one of the males will go to another collection and we'll end up with 2 females and a male in the tropical house.
I've got 2 cats, and when I take them to the vet, they know they're going to the vet. Do the animals here know who you are and your job?
Yeah, I mean, I've only been here 6 months, but those which I've had any dealings with start to recognise me already, particularly the primates. They're very smart, and they've recognised me already, but you'll notice with lots of the species, some of the big cats, for example, will know keepers that have been their keepers for a long time, and they've decided that they either like or don't like, and you get very strong reactions from animals according to which people are handling them. Yeah, definitely.
And do they generally associate you with discomfort?
I hope not. I mean, the interesting thing about zoological veterinary work compared to domestic is that to have hands-on clinical work, with nearly any of the species, you need to anaesthetise them. So most of their expectations, if you're an ape, for example, is to do with getting darted by me, probably. And then once the dart's gone in, 10 minutes later, they don't know what's going on. So,
have you ever considered adopting a disguise to?
Well, people actually do that, I think, sometimes. There are little ruses you can to avoid being spotted, but I haven't done it yet. No, perhaps a nose and glasses.
A trench coat.
Yeah,
I think security might have something to say about that. Do you use their feeding rituals for kind of like I was talking to the keepers earlier about the jam sandwiches for some of the monkeys? It's a good way of giving them antibiotics and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Medication can be really quite tricky, particularly in the primates, because and obviously we have a massive collection of primates here, both the sheer number of them, but also the number of species as well. And as I said earlier, they're really ingenious and they're very inquisitive. And some of them, if they decide that tablets are sweets, will eat them like sweets, and you don't have to put them in anything. And some of them, once they've worked out they don't like them, are almost impossible to get them down, so the keepers do end up using various ingenious methods to try and get them inside them, jam being one of them here.
And do you use additional supplements and things for things they might necessarily receive here as opposed to in the wild?
Yeah, absolutely. Various minerals and vitamins. It's very difficult to replicate certain animals' diets in captivity. What would be a good example? Giraffe, for example, who browse in the wild off tens, maybe hundreds of species of different leaf. That's almost impossible for us to achieve. So if they're having forage of another description and we know that the dietary makeup of that forage isn't adequate, we'll supplement it with minerals and vitamins.
And is that a similar type of vitamin and mineral that we would consume ourselves, or is it like specially made for the animals?
I mean, it's the same things. Vitamin B for animals doesn't differ from vitamin B for humans in any way. So it's the same constituents, but they'll be put together in different ratios according to the animal's need, because their diet might be very different from yours or mine, for example. So there are specialised companies which make specific zoo diets. My practice, for example, makes supplements for various marine mammals because they're not getting enough vitamin A, for example, in captivity. Actually, one of the things which part of my job here, and as I say, I've only been here for 6 months, is to build up a proper preventive medicine program, which we have already, but could be formalised in a better way. And one of the things that preventive medicine includes is kind of strict guidelines on nutrition and the diets that we feed to each of the animals. And some zoos now are taking on employing their own nutritionists, and that's not something that we have yet at Twycross, but hopefully in the future we might do, because it's such a big part of their sort of captive care. And one of my jobs is to go through the diets of all the animals here and check that we're feeding the correct things and that we're not impacting on their health adversely in any way, because we're not providing them with something that they need. Yeah.
And how would you train to become a veterinary nutritionist then? I've never actually heard of that.
Yeah, the only one that I know of, I believe she is a vet first and foremost, and then she has gone on to specialise in nutrition since.
Okay.
A little bit like I've gone and done my masters in wild animal health in general. It's a really difficult subject, not least because these animals do have such different diets, and you can look at two primates and think, well, they look very similar, but one of them might be an omnivore and spend a lot of its time eating insects and fruit, and one of them might be a pure leaf eater. We have lots of langur here, and that's all they eat, so their guts are much more like a ruminant's, and they have very delicate ruminal or intestinal flora, bacterial balances, which if you give them any antibiotics for a cut or a scratch, you knock off all those good bacteria as well, and then you into the realms of giving them probiotics to try and get it back up. So it's quite a complicated treatment.
Are they susceptible to kind of human conditions, like if someone comes in with a cold?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. So colds, influenza type viruses get passed backwards and forwards. They are susceptible to things like herpes simplex that cause cold sores, lots of these primates. They can get hepatitis A and B, so in terms of keeper health as well, there are lots of diseases. I guess because we're very close from an evolutionary point of view, or we're closer to all of our primates than we are to, say, our giraffe. There are many diseases termed zoonoses which can transfer from the animals to us and vice versa, and so we need to take precautions to stop either of those things happening.
Is that why it's important not to feed the animals?
From a visitor point of view?
Yeah, there's all the signs up saying don't feed.
Yeah, that's one thing. So we have to be very careful that the general public don't have contact with our animals that could potentially transfer disease either way. And as a result, all the health checks we do on our animals for the tropical house, for example, where people get to walk right through the exhibit and potentially touch marmosets, we have to be very stringent. The other point really is that traditionally visitors might like to give animals like ice creams and things. We have no control over the amount or the type of food that they're giving them, and then that disrupts their diet, obviously.
All right, brilliant, thanks.
No problem.
The new elephant house was completed in 1991 and an extra grass paddock was added in 2000. Our elephants' favourite food is bananas, which they often get as treats. However, too many would cause weight problems. Asian elephants can live for up to 70 years. Twycross Zoo has 2 pairs of Madagascar teal. This species is classed as endangered with only 500 to 1,000 left in the wild. The North American wood ducks at Twycross Zoo have hatched 35 chicks since their arrival in 1998. Penguins feed on a range of seafood, often bulking up on krill after the breeding season.
You've been listening to the Zoo Radio podcast. Please like and subscribe to get the latest episodes.